distinguished jurors of the International People's Tribunal, complainants, defendants, prosecutors, clerks, amicus curiae, solidarity guests, comrades, friends, ladies and gentlemen. For almost 4 decades now, the government of the Republic of the Philippines, GRP, and the National Democratic Front of the Philippines, NDFP, have been engaged in peace negotiations. From the perspective of the NDFP, this could be a viable arena to achieve basic social, economic, and political reforms in Philippine society, an opportunity to resolve the roots of the armed conflict, and consequently attain a just and lasting peace. These negotiations have resulted in 38 major agreements and joint statements, which were either signed or initialed. The Comprehensive Agreement on Respect for Human Rights and International Humanitarian Law, CARIL, of 1998 is the first major agreement signed by the parties. These principles and standards apply to the following persons: civilians or those taking no active part in the hostilities, members of armed forces who have surrendered or laid down their arms, those placed hors de combat by sickness, wounds, or any other cause, persons deprived of liberty for reasons related to the armed conflict, and relatives and duly authorized representatives of above-named persons. Part 5 of the CARIL stipulates that a Joint Monitoring Committee, JMC, will be formed to monitor compliance with the agreement by both parties. The JMC shall receive complaints of violations and all pertinent information and initiate requests or recommendations for the implementation of CARIL. The JMC shall request investigation of a complaint and come up with reports and recommendations on its work to the parties. The CARIL further stipulates the formation of a joint secretariat, the JS, to provide technical and administrative support for the work of the JMC. Since its formal opening in 2004 until its closing in 2021, the JS, or Joint Secretariat, have received a total of 7,474 complaints of alleged violations of the CARIL, that is up to June 1, 2019. 5,438 against the GRP, or 72.76% of all complaints, and 2,036 against the NDFP, or 27.24%. The 5,438 complaint forms filed against the GRP show violations of the full scope of the people's rights and freedoms and of principles and standards of international humanitarian law. Of these, 474 complaints involve 526 incidents of IHL violations during the term of GRP President Rodrigo Duterte. The incidents reported in the complaints occurred in 57 provinces out of a total of 82 provinces. The regions with the most number of incidents reported are the very same regions that were declared by the GRP as priority regions in their counterinsurgency programs. Elements of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, AFP, are the most frequent perpetrators cited in the complaint forms. As the primary implementing force of the GRP's counterinsurgency programs, they appear in majority of the reported complaints, 92.40%. Next to the AFP, elements of the Philippine National Police, PNP, and the paramilitary rank second and third, respectively. Table 5 details the various types of violations with the highest corresponding number of incidents and victims. The incidents involved grave violations of international humanitarian law, majority of which were committed against civilians in pursuance of the GRP's counterinsurgency plans. Many of these violations arose from the forcible use of civilian communities in military operations and the treatment of civilian population as objects of attack using indiscriminate aerial bombardment, strafing, artillery fire, mortar fire, and similar forms of destruction of lives and property, such as schools. Other violations are the forcible evacuations or forcible reconcentration of civilians, use of civilians as guides and or human shields in military operations, exploitation of children in the context of armed conflict, maintaining and supporting and tolerating paramilitary groups and private security agencies, violent reprisals against non-combatants, desecration of remains of those who have died in the course of the armed conflict, and violation of the rights of hors de combat. There are individual children and women victims numbering 2,196 and 516 respectively. These numbers do not count the en masse victims of indiscriminate gunfire and aerial bombings of communities, forcible evacuations, and attacks on and use of schools and public places for military purposes. I will now give some 7 cases of violations of international humanitarian law. 1. Noel Gulmatico, torture and desecration of remains of hors de combat on July 1, 2016 in North Cotabato, Mindanao. Gulmatico, a commanding officer of the NPA in southern Mindanao, was one of the casualties during an armed encounter between the composite units of the AFP and the paramilitary and NPA. The complaint filed contains his daughter's narration that at the funeral homes, she observed that her father's eyes were intentionally gouged out. The right side of his mouth was sewn all the way to his neck, his mouth dented with the tongue expurgated. There were bruises on his body and a gunshot wound on his right chest. Several media outlets have reported that there were witnesses in the area who can attest that Gulmatico's remains were severely mutilated when they found him. They believe that he was still alive when captured, was consequently subjected to torture, and died due to the mutilation. A few days after photos of Gulmatico's mutilated with eyes gouged out circulated on Facebook, the photo was posted by a radio broadcaster and was shared by 156 times as of the following day. However, the photos are not available anymore after one day. Relatives of Gulmatico questioned the AFP's version of the events. They said, "What kind of high-powered firearm do they have that can cut his tongue? We might be less educated, but we know that if he was hit by a shot from the firearms, his face should have been shattered, but his nose and mouth were intact." Second case, Raymond Tinoylino and Gegi Tinoylino, killings of NPA father and son on July 12, 2017 in Compostela Valley, Mindanao. Raymond, 14 years old and grade 5 student, visited his father Gegi, who was a fighter of the NPA. According to witnesses, Raymond and his father were walking alongside a stream when they saw 3 helicopters hovering over them. The helicopters suddenly dropped bombs which fell near the stream. Around the same time, there were paramilitary members known as KAFGU under the command of the Philippine Army positioned above a small hill, who began firing at them, and they were hit by the bullets. Raymond tried to flee, even though he was already wounded. The Kafgu members continued firing at him despite his pleas. Geji died, and Redmond's face was shattered, and he was also hit in the chest. The following day, a spokesperson of the AFP issued a statement that Raymond died together with 7 others during an armed encounter between the AFP and NPA. The AFP falsely claimed that Raymond, a minor, had been recruited by the NPA to become a combatant. Number 3, NDF consultant Laura T. Manipis and NPA commander Jeruel B. Domingo enforced disappearance on February 24, 2018 in Kidapawan, Mindanao. Manipis, a consultant of the NDFP in far southern Mindanao, and her husband Doming, a commander of the NPA in Sarangani and South Cotabato, have been missing. They were last seen in Kidapawan City, North Cotabato, after visiting their children in Makilala of the same province. The day before, they went to Kidapawan on board a motorcycle to arrange for transportation. They were bound for an activity related to the peace process. In the evening, they got off along the main street in the city in front of a bank. They asked a motorcycle driver to negotiate with the driver of a public utility to bring them to Kabakan, North Cotabato. They also texted the relative taking care of their children that they will be heading to a meeting the following day. This was the last time they were seen or heard from. Prior to this incident, their eldest daughter had been harassed by a police officer in 2016 when she was interrogated about her mother's whereabouts. Manipis' family also reported that they have been subjected to surveillance for the past 2 years. Incident number 4. Patalunan massacre of farmers and desecration of remains on May 13, 2018 in Camarines Sur, Luzon. An alleged encounter occurred between AFP and the NPA. Farmers Roberto Ramos, Ronel Naris, and Antonio Bonagua went to their farms to harvest coconuts. Their farms happened to be near the encounter site. The families of the 3 waited for them to return home, but they never did. They believed that the 3 were taken to the military camp, so they searched and made inquiries in all military and police camps. Almost a month after, a farmer was harvesting vegetables in his farm when he noticed a hole that had been covered up recently. He became suspicious since he knew that 3 of his fellow farmers were missing. He then reported this to village officials. The officials then proceeded to the hole and started digging when they saw a person's foot. They searched for other holes and found other grave sites 30 and 80 meters away. The identity of the first body could not easily be established. He was naked and had a slash wound on his neck. It was later determined that he was Naris, and according to the preliminary autopsy, his penis was cut off. The second body was identified as Bonagua because of the short pants that he was wearing. His shirt was used to cover his eyes. 3 of his front teeth were missing. A crack on the lower back portion of his skull was found. His hands were tied behind his back. He had a 6-inch deep laceration on his left shoulder and a gunshot wound on his chest. The third body belonged to Ramos. His long-sleeved shirt and slippers were found beneath his body. Since his body bore no marks or wounds, it is believed he was buried alive. The 5th case, Beverly Geronimo, extrajudicial killing of farmer and daughter Nene Geronimo, frustrated killing on May 26, 2018 in Agusan del Sur, Mindanao. Beverly, member of a farmers association and president of a parent-teacher association of a local school, and her 8-year-old daughter and grade 3 student, Nene, together with Lucy, a relative, went to a town center to buy school supplies. Lucy recounted that while in the market, she already noticed suspicious men following them. After they finished their market chore, they boarded a motorcycle and headed home. As they passed by a village, Lucy noticed 3 armed riders from the Philippine Army chasing them. The armed men stopped them on the road and began firing at them. Beverly was hit in the back, while Nene was hit on her left shoulder. Lucy, unharmed, jumped off the motorcycle and hid in a ditch nearby. She saw the armed soldiers going near Beverly and shooting her multiple times before speeding away. Beverly sustained 7 gunshot wounds, including 1 to the head, that caused her immediate death. Nene survived. During the past 9 years, Beverly has been a target of military harassment. She and her co-associate members were red tagged by soldiers as NPA members and listed as NPA surrenderees. The soldiers repeatedly threatened Beverly that if she did not stop her activities and continue her alleged support for the NPA, she might be a victim of tokhang, referring to the common term of the GRP's campaign against drugs, where most victims are killed. The 6th case, Antique 7, massacre of unarmed CPP and NDFP members on August 15, 2018 in Antique, Panay, Visayas. 7 unarmed members of the CPP and NDFP Panay regional and education propaganda staff were killed shortly after midnight. Police raided the place where the victims were sleeping. They alleged that they were about to serve arrest warrants against 2 of them when a firefight ensued. Residents in the area attested that there was no firefight and the bullets were fired by the police and soldiers. Families of the victims said they were unarmed and the police planted the explosives, guns, and bullets that were found in their possession. The autopsy conducted showed that there were no gunpowder traces on the bodies of the victims, indicating that they were shot from a distance of more than a meter. Further, the downward trajectory of bullets suggested that they were shot while they were lying down, crouching forward, or those who shot them were in an elevated position. The victims were shot in the head and chest. According to their families, the nature of the injuries showed these were inflicted while the victims were still alive. The 7th and the last example. Mariam Uy Acob, extrajudicial killing of human rights worker on September 23, 2018 in Maguindanao, Mindanao. Acob was riding a motorcycle on her way home. When she reached a certain village, 2 armed men, believed to be military agents who were on board a motorcycle, suddenly overtook her motorcycle and shot her 7 times, resulting in her immediate death. She sustained 7 gunshot wounds on her chest, stomach, shoulder, and back. Acob was a paralegal of a regional human rights alliance and a leader of Tindig Bangsamoro. Weeks before she was killed, she shared how she braved death threats in the course of her human rights work. Conclusion: the complaints of IHL violations filed with the JMC showed the GRP's war of aggression in the name of counterinsurgency, ceaselessly violating the full spectrum of people's rights. In the armed conflict, the GRP violates IHL and well-entrenched rules of war, where non-combatants are targets as well as captured or wounded fighters. The JMC, until its closing in 2021, has provided an alternative venue for the victims to seek redress and justice which have long eluded them. It is to their utmost benefit if the JMC would be reactivated. In the meantime, this remains an elusive idea. Since this remains an elusive idea, venues such as the International People's Tribunal is a most welcome endeavor. Not only does it provide an opportunity to expose the violations of human rights and international humanitarian law committed by the GRP, but more importantly, it serves as a moral expression of our responsibility to seek justice for the victims. Thank you.